Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, out of Voice of Radio. So today, we need to take a look at how Granbull has suddenly become a phenomenal deck again. I think Granbull's just gone back to being top tier. We had this Limitless tournament recently, and in day 2 of that tournament, there was a player that actually went 7-0 in day 2 playing Granbull. Now, they didn't actually make top 8 because their day 1 result wasn't quite good enough, but going 7-0 in day 2, bearing in mind day 2 is only made up of people that did well enough in day 1 to get into day 2, should tell you that this is not some joke fringe deck anymore. This is a legit deck. Now, it's all built around Granbull, shockingly enough, and although you can do 110 for free energy, and you do play enough energy, really it's the attack all out. 30 damage for 1 fairy energy, but if you have no cards in your hand, you do 160 damage. 160 damage for a single energy is absolutely huge. The only real downside here, of course, is that you do need to make sure that you have 0 cards in hand. And firstly, that means getting your hand down to 0 cards. Secondly, that means making sure you've got an answer for when you've got a 0 card hand to get back to a not 0 card hand. And that's basically what your Pokemon do here. Now, you do play 1 copy of Ditto Prism Star because you're playing a couple of Stage 2s, so clearly having a basic that can evolve into either of them is an excellent idea. And we do play 1 copy of the Hooper from Cosmic Eclipse because for a single energy, you do 10 damage plus 20 more for each of your opponent's Pokemon that has an ability. It's a really nice counter to Giratina that has an ability and relies on Malamar that has an ability, but it can be used against any ability-hungry deck. But then we're just down to Makago and the newest Oranguru. And these are essentially the cards that firstly get you down to a 0 card hand, and secondly get you out of a 0 card hand. So Makago comes along, and it's got an ability, Smooth Over, that lets you search your deck for any card and put it on top of your deck. We then see Oranguru, which lets you swap a card in your hand for the top card of your deck. And this does 2 things beautifully. Firstly, it means that you can use Makago to get any 1 card and then immediately draw it. But secondly, it lets you put a card in your hand that you can't play back into your deck. And this is huge, because remember, if you've got even a single card in your hand, a second energy, a second supporter, an evolution in your hand, but no basic on the bench from which to evolve it, you're not able to attack for 160, and if you miss 160 attack, the whole deck falls apart. 160 will be getting non-GXs, your single prize Pokemon. You'll also be getting a very easy 1-hit KO on Arceus and Dialga and Palkia. It is a lovely attack. But as soon as you start missing attacks, it goes very, very wrong very, very quickly. This needs to be an attack which is firing from the very, very first turn. Obviously, I'm referring to the first turn you're allowed to attack, your second turn overall. That needs to happen, because if your opponent can get ahead of you, they can still win the prize race. The thing that's unusual about this list compared to some of the others we've seen recently is you're not playing any hardcore draw. There's no Zeb Striker to discard your hand and get an extra 4 cards. There's no multiple copies of Pidgeotto, look at the top 2 cards of your deck, put 1 in your hand and the other on the bottom of your deck. All you're doing here is just getting essentially an extra 1 card per turn with Makago and Oranguru. But because you're playing a free Makago line and free Oranguru, in theory you can be doing this twice every turn. I suppose you could have free Makago, free Oranguru on the field and be using this combo 3 times a turn, but if you're doing that, you don't have any Granbull out, and you need at least a Granbull and a Schnubbull so that you can evolve up next turn and keep the attacks rolling. But if you're getting any 2 cards you want every turn, combined with getting 2 cards from your hand that you can't play back into your deck, you've got a pretty good chance of pulling this off turn after turn after turn. Now, in terms of trainer cards, again, this is all... well, no, that's not fair. This is largely built just around the greatest chance you've got of being able to get a 0-card hand. So one of the great cards in this deck that we just don't see in other decks, well, not many at least, is Diantha. It is a supporter card that only works if one of your fairy Pokemon was KO'd during your opponent's last turn, but then again, that shouldn't be an issue because you're playing Granbull. There should be a lot of turns where your opponent knocks out a Granbull, and in you come. And what it does is it lets you put any 2 cards from your discard pile into your hand. And this could be basically anything to try and make sure that you're going to get that attack off. Could be cards that let you discard, it could be an energy, it could be a Granbull, it could be frankly anything, but in theory you look at your discard pile, you look at your hand, Diantha should get you 2 cards to get you to a 0-card hand with a Granbull with an energy. Obviously, Quick Ball is a phenomenal new card in this particular deck because it gets your basics while discarding a card from your hand, and this is something you have to do in Granbull decks a fair bit. Discard cards from your hand so that you've then got a 0-card hand. It's the reason we play 1 copy of Great Catcher, discard 2 cards from your hand, gust up a GX, although to be fair, ADP is so prevalent at the moment, being able to gust that off the bench is awesome. Bearing in mind you're only playing 1 copy, but you can get it back with Diantha, which is an important consideration. We are playing 4 Custom Catcher as well for other gusting, bearing in mind you can search it out quite easily with Macargo, and if you play it normally, you draw until you got 3 cards in your hand, which isn't always amazing, but in a deck where your goal is to get down to a 0-card hand turn after turn, drawing one of these just means you draw 3 cards, and that can totally get you back on your feet. That's pretty awesome. Now, in terms of other supporters, we do play 1 copy of Cynthia, but we don't want any more than 1 copy of Cynthia. And we don't want to play Professor's Research Magnolia because you don't want a giant hand. Because if you've got a giant hand, you've got to get rid of more cards to get rolling. So what we see here is Marnie puts you to a 5-card hand, your opponent to a 4-card hand. It's moderately good disruption, but also a 5-card hand is much easier to get to a 0-card hand than a 6-card hand. We see 1 copy of Faber to get rid of Pokemon Tools or Special Energy, get them in the Lost Zone. And then we see a single copy here of Rosa. Rosa's a great card, of course, because if you had a Pokemon KO'd the previous turn, you search your deck for a Pokemon, an energy, and a trainer. It's such a great card for a single prize deck, where your opponent's got to take 6 KOs to win. Why do we not play multiple? Because you can only play Rosa when you had a Pokemon KO'd last turn. It can often lead to, well, a card in your hand you can't get rid of. Now, I've told you about Quick Ball, but going back to Pokemon Search, we've actually got quite a lot of it. We've got 4 copies of Great Ball. Look at the top 7 cards of your deck, find a Pokemon there, put it in your hand. You don't have to, obviously, you can fail it, which is important. And then 4 copies of Pokemon Communication. Firstly, this will get you any Pokemon you want from your deck, but also here, it can take a Pokemon in your hand you currently cannot evolve into, and put it back in your deck. A single card clogging up your hand in this deck will be the difference between getting an attack and keeping momentum, and losing an attack and possibly losing the game. We got 3 copies of Switch, fairly important because you got stuff like Macargo that you do not want stuck in the active. We've got 1 copy of Ordinary Rod to try and recover your Granbull. It is fairly important you've got as many Granbull as you possibly can get. That's fairly important. Ordinarily, between the 4-4 line and the Ditto and Ordinary Rod, that gives you access to 11 Pokemon of the Granbull variety, Snubbull and Granbull. You need 12, 6 Granbull, 6 Snubbull. but there'll usually be a non-Granbull prize taken at some point, and if there isn't, you can always use Diantha to reuse your ordinary rod if you really need to get that 6th Granbull. We've got 1 copy of Power Pad to get your supporters back. You've got some good supporters in this deck, like we said. 1 copy of Reset Stamp is standard. Just make sure opponents shuffle a hand into their deck and draw cards equal to their remaining prizes. If they take a big lead, this can put them down to a low hand size, and you're rolling. We got 1 copy of Shrine of Punishment. Just drops 1 damage counter on each EX and GX between turns. It can be really good for whittling down some of the bigger Pokemon that you're otherwise struggling to KO. And then we've got a couple fairy tricks. We've got Wondrous Labyrinth Prism Star. This increases the attack cost of all non-fairy Pokemon by 1 colourless energy. Could buy you a turn, which is another attack, which could be the difference. And we've got 2 fairy charms, 1 ability, and 1 lightning. But bearing in mind, you can search these out with Macargo, and you can reuse them with Diantha if they are really, really important. And they give you protection from EXs or GXs of a particular type, and these are fairly standard. Because Lightning protects you from Pikachu and Zekrom, which is kind of ridiculous. Also works against Raichu and Alolan Raichu if that's what you're into, though not against Tapu Koko V, because they don't work against Vs. And ability is primarily there to protect you against Mewtwo and Mew. So then you've got protection against Mewtwo and Mew and Pikachu and Zekrom, and you're rocking a 1-hit KO on ADP that are the biggest tag teams we've got at the moment. You don't have a specific answer for Reshiram and Charizard. Sorry. But then again, you should be 2-hit KOing for 2 prizes rather than 1-hit KOing for 1 prize, so you should still win the prize trade if you get going nice and early. So there you go, ladies and gentlemen. Shout out to LimitlessTCG.com for providing the deck list. And this is a very good deck. I have been a huge fan of Granbull since the card was revealed. I've top cut more than 1 League Cup with this deck. I am absolutely in love with it. Although this doesn't look like the builds that we used to have, I think it's very much still legit. But I'd like to know what you think. So let me know in the comment section, that's me nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWassy, and Twitch for some live action at twitch.tv/PTCGRadio. If you want to support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all that good stuff, head on over to patreon.com/PTCGRadio, where you can do exactly that. And please do make sure you're checking out youtube.com/WassyPlays, where you can find out about a whole bunch of games that don't have Pokemon in, but are pretty gosh darned awesome nonetheless. But by far the most important thing as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.